If Joseph Smith had a first vision at all, it happened in the spring of 1825, when he was 19 years old. Let's go over the evidence. There are 5 main parts to determine the date of Joseph Smith's first vision. 1. The death of Alvin Smith. 2. 4 of the Smiths joined the Presbyterian Church. 3. The Palmyra revivals. And arguably the most important is the testimony of Oliver Cowdery and the testimony of William Smith. First is the death of Alvin Smith. One of the things that spurred Joseph Smith's seeking of the one true church is the death of his older brother Alvin. Alvin died November 19, 1823. And as part of William Smith's testimony, the preacher at his funeral was Reverend Stockton, who intimated very strongly that Alvin was going to hell because he had not been baptized.
Alvin is lost.
This source is from the Latter-day Saint Millennial Star, page 133. Second is that 4 of the Smiths joined the Presbyterian Church. Now, fearing for their own souls, 4 of the Smiths sought membership in Reverend Stockton's church, or the Presbyterian Church. They joined in 1824. Joseph reported in his 1838 first vision account that after he experienced the first vision, he came home and told his mother that, "I have learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true." Why then would Lucy and some of her children join a church they knew was wrong? Wait, people like Fair Mormon are trying to tell you that the family joined in 1820? Well, that's false. In the same source of the Millennial Star, William Smith says that the family was hesitant to join the Presbyterian Church because of his opinion on Alvin going to hell. So these 2 events alone would push the date of the first vision back to sometime in 1824. But let's keep going. 3 is the Palmyra revivals. In Joseph Smith history, verse 5, it reads, "Sometime in the 2nd year after our removal to Manchester, there was in the place where we lived an unusual excitement on the subject of religion. It commenced with the Methodists, but soon became general among all the sects in that region of country. Indeed, the whole district of country seemed affected by it, and great multitudes united themselves to the different religious parties, which created no small stir among the people, some crying low here and others low there. Some were contending for the Methodist faith, some for the Presbyterian, and some for the Baptist." In other words, during the time of Joseph Smith's first vision, each of these 3 religions must have been undergoing some kind of revival. Likewise, these revivals must have included Reverend Stockton and Reverend Lane, which means they would have taken place sometime in or after 1824. But before we jump to 1824, I want to talk about 1820. In 1820, a Presbyterian newspaper reported that there were no distinct mentions of revivals. 4 months later, in 1821, it says that there were no special revivals in any of our congregations. And 8 months after that, they reported that there were no general revivals of any religions during that year. The Baptist Church records show clearly that they had no revivals in 1820, for the Palmyra congregation gained only 6 by baptism, while the neighboring Baptist churches of Lyons, Canandaigua, and Farmington showed net losses of 4, 5, and 9 respectively. An examination of the figures for the years preceding and following 1820 yields the same picture of no revival, so far as the Baptist Church in the area is concerned. And according to the minutes of the annual conferences for the Methodist Church, in 1819, the Methodist Church recorded a net loss of 23 members. And in 1820, there was a net loss of 6 members. And in 1821, there was a net loss of 40 members. Question: could Joseph Smith have picked a worse date in which to place his first vision? But anyway, now let's talk about 1824 and 25. Reverend George Lane himself reported that the Methodist Church in the beginning of 1824 gained only 25 members, but that in September of 1824, he recalls that a revival appeared to break out afresh. And in October of 1824, the Presbyterian Church reported that there were 4 instances of special revival, among which was that in the church at Palmyra of the Presbytery of Geneva. And in the Methodist Magazine of November of 1824, the presiding elder of the Ontario district reported that though for 2 or 3 years we saw no great awakenings, but that the present year we have had some glorious revivals. Also, keep in mind that Joseph Smith claims that the Palmyra revivals started with the Methodist sect. And in December of 1824, a Baptist preacher wrote to his friends stating that, "As I came on my journey this way, I tarried a few days and baptized 8. So just to summarize, there were no revivals in Palmyra in 1820, and there were plenty of revivals with all 3 religions in 1824 and 25. Okay, moving on. 4 is the testimony of Oliver Cowdery. Oliver Cowdery places the date of the revival in 1823, but makes no reference to any vision occurring in 1820. In fact, he stated that Smith was wondering in 1823 if a supreme being did exist, which seems strange if Smith had already had a vision 3 years prior in 1820. In his version, Oliver Cowdery also gives the name of Reverend Lane of the Methodist sect, and claims, just as William and Joseph did, that the revival was spurred by this sect. And as I previously stated, according to Reverend George Lane, there were no Methodist revivals until September of 1824. and probably the most important, is the testimony of William Smith.
In his own book, William dates the revivals to sometime between 1822 and 1823. He also places Joseph as 17 years old and recounts the vision, not of God and Jesus, but of an angel who informs him that none of the churches are correct. Additionally, William Smith gives the names Reverend Stockton and Reverend Lane as being key characters in Joseph Smith's journey to seek for a heavenly vision.
And according to the Wayne Centennial, Reverend Stockton was not placed in Palmyra until February 18th of 1824. So with all of these things, with the death of Alvin Smith, with his family joining the Presbyterian Church, and of the Palmyra revivals themselves, and the testimonies of William and Oliver, the conclusion that we come to is that there is little else to conclude except that Joseph Smith had his first vision in the spring of 1825. That is, if he had the vision at all.